Today we're going to talk about we're going to have as talks about Scottish Safe Haven Network's Federated Governance overview and next steps. So the main speaker will be Susan Krunger, who is the manager of these Safe Haven Federated Governance Pilot manager. So Susan is going to introduce herself and the team, and floor is yours, Susan.
Thank you very much, Hong Han and Rachel and everybody else. Thanks for joining. Hopefully you can see my slides. So yes, I'm Susan, as Hong Han introduced me. I'm a program manager with the Health Informatics Centre at the University of Dundee and project manager for the Federated Governance Pilot. So I'm here today with colleagues from across the Scottish Safe Haven Network to talk about the Federated Governance Pilot that we've been running. I'll talk for about half of the time, so maybe half an hour or so, about federated governance and how we got here. And then I'll open up the floor to questions and discussions with the broader team. Michael can't be here today representing Public Health Scotland, but hopefully there are others on the call that will be able to jump in if there's a question for PHS. But we have Jane here from DASH, the Grampian Safe Haven, Pamela and Stuart from Dataloch, which is the Lothian Safe Haven. Kate and Ollie are probably also on the call representing RDS, so a nice spread of people from across the network to hopefully field any questions that come our way. So the Scottish Safe Haven Network is a collaboration of the organisations behind Scotland's secure data infrastructure. The network is comprised of the National Safe Haven and 4 regional safe havens, and they offer that secure access to health data extracts for research. In Scotland, NHS health boards are grouped into 4 NHS research and development, or R&D nodes. Those nodes partner with their regional safe havens to support data access, both for the NHS and also for the researchers and the innovators that are looking to access data from those regions. Together with the Chief Scientist's Office, CSO, these R&D boards facilitate and support medical research, providing the regional expertise and overview of the research activity across Scotland. Together, they do cover the whole of Scotland, but in reality, they've got varying levels of coverage currently with those health boards that you can see in bold underlined on the screen. Just the possibility of enabling access to routine healthcare data for research, it's really founded on those long-standing trusted relationships that the regional safe havens have developed with the data controllers in those boards. So without the trust that these relationships bring, that data, it just really wouldn't be available to research at all. So we're really grateful and value those relationships that we have. So the 4 regional safe havens, they're joined by the National Safe Haven to form that Scottish Safe Haven network with the support of Research Data Scotland. And together they aim to just continuously improve that system for accessing NHS data for research. Applications for access to national level data that's hosted by Public Health Scotland in the National Safe Haven, they're routed through the Public Benefit and Privacy Panel, or PBAP, approval pathway, where, like all approval pathways, the applications are scrutinised to ensure that there's a public benefit goal and that the use of the data is appropriate. Applications for access to the regional level data, they're made via the specific regional safe havens representing their respective NHS health boards. In each of those health boards, Caldicott Guardians oversee the use and the sharing of patient data for purposes other than direct care, including for research purposes. These people, these Caldicott Guardians and their IG leads, information governance leads, they're really central to the Federated Governance Pilot, and they're heavily involved both in the design and now in the implementation phase. So over time, as those individual health boards have worked with their regional safe havens to streamline locally their processes, they have become somewhat localized, which has led to some inconsistencies between the regions and the projects, which led then to where we are now. So in response to that inconsistency, the Scottish Safe Haven Network explored with their health boards the introduction of a streamlined, federated system of governance across Scotland's regional safe havens. The main objective being to enable a researcher to make a single application for access to data from multiple safe havens, and those then pseudonymized data extracts being transferred to a single trusted research environment for analysis. Last year, Research Data Scotland, or RDS, they funded a 12-month federated governance design project or phase, which involved the 4 NHS R&D nodes, specifically the leads from the 4 regional safe havens and the health boards for whom they hold data. So by federated governance, we mean that any of the regional safe havens, the 4 regional safe havens, can accept an application for access to data from multiple health boards through a unified approach and approvals pathway. Data approved for use for research purposes is always de-identified, pretty much always de-identified and provisioned in trusted research environments, which are highly secure and computing environments through which approved researchers can access the de-identified data to work on approved projects with public benefit. De-identifying data means removing all of the identifiers from it. So the names and the addresses, unique personal identifiers like the Community Health Index or CHI number, for instance. Usually records are further de-identified by adding a pseudonym, a completely new random number or code, and that is per project, which makes sure that all of the information in the related records are kept together whilst ensuring that the individuals can't be identified. All safe havens in Scotland adhere to the 5 safes, and the 5 safes are a framework where we look at safe people. So we make sure that the researchers accessing the data are trained and accredited. Safe projects, so the data being used by the projects has to be used ethically for research that delivers clear public benefit. Safe settings refers to the physical and the digital settings to access the data, that they're controlled and secured. So that's those trusted research environments. Safe data, that researchers can only access data that's been de-identified and protects individual privacy. And safe outputs refers to the fact that all research outputs, before leaving the secure environment, they're always checked to ensure that individuals can't be identified, that there's no data leakage. So regional safe havens, they provide the depth and granularity of regional data sets that are not available through the national safe haven, which of course offers the breadth of nationally collected data sets. So some of the types of regionally collected data that regional safe havens can provide are primary care or GP data, secondary care data, community care, stroke data, chemo care, social care, labs, imaging, pharmacy prescribing, and specialized care databases, and just a whole lot more of regionally led activity that leads to specific data sets being created. Nationally collected or population level data available through the National Safe Haven, they include things like SMR or the Scottish Morbidity Records. There's a number of those. Prescribing Information System, so PIS. Accident and Emergency is another nationally collected data set. The National Records of Scotland are available through National Safe Haven, so that's statistical data, including the census. And SMI, Scottish Medical Imaging, which is a research copy of the de-identified medical images from the national PAC system. So regional data through the regional safe havens, that offers that depth and granularity, whilst national gives breadth. The regional safe havens also have access to extracts of nationally collected data relating to the individuals within their regions, and these can then be linked to the locally collected data. Now, it's not always really straightforward or easy to say if data is national or regional. There's a bit of a fuzzy line in the middle there. And it depends, I guess, largely on how you could think of it in terms of how similar the data looks across the health board. So if it looks the same across Scotland and or it can be provisioned via a single source, then generally you'd consider that national data, for instance, the prescribing system. On the other hand, something like labs data or track care, that's collected and coded quite differently across regions. So it looks quite different. And it's the local relationships that the regional safe havens have with the clinical experts is really quite essential in understanding the data structure and making it research ready. As part of the Federated Data and Governance Pilot, we have, for instance, harmonized those regional labs data sets. Some of them, we've started that harmonization activity, which makes them more, makes them easier for researchers to use when they're brought together in a single environment, despite the regional differences. So when designing the federated governance model with the Caldecott Guardians and their information governance leads, a really important point they raised was that decisions on data access are not made by a single person or role. There are many perspectives that are taken when considering your data access applications. That distribution of roles and delegations of responsibilities does look different across different health boards because of their local structures and nuances, but all of the regional safe havens operate under the oversight of their Caldecott IG and research governance teams. So that's common across the safe havens. Each safe haven has their own individual but equivalent application and review process. But as we spoke about before, there's been a growth in the number of projects seeking granular data from multiple regional safe havens, and those separate application processes have proven to be a barrier in allowing that multi-health board data to be combined, and hence the Federated Governance Pilot. So currently, if a researcher wants to access data from multiple regional safe havens, or until now, I should say, they have had to fill out separate application forms for each one. Each of the safe havens has an equivalent process for checking that application before the research is approved to access the data that they need. But this multiple and parallel application review and approvals process, it can lead to duplication of effort, and there's opportunity for error with the multiple applications being filled out, different approval routes and timeframes, and also the potential for that siloed risk assessment and inconsistencies that might occur across the different safe havens. So as an alternative, federated governance seeks to streamline the access to the multi-health board data. It enables researchers to apply to one regional safe haven, asking for access to data in multiple safe havens. And then the approvals process of the lead safe haven, the one that accepted the application generally, will then decide on behalf of the others whether the researchers should be allowed to access the data. So if a new application is received at a regional safe haven, if it requests access to multiple safe haven data, the application is shared behind the scenes, if you like, across the involved safe havens to check that they're all happy for the lead safe haven to make the decisions about whether a researcher gets access or not on behalf of them. So really the first question they ask is this project and this application even suitable for federated governance? Because not all of them are. The approvals process within the lead regional safe haven can then, as is currently the case, either approve that application, they could request further information, They could refer it for additional approval, either within the network or escalating to PBAP, for instance, if a different approvals route is required, or they could just reject the application. Once approved, then the data is gathered from the relevant regional safe havens and de-identified, and then placed in a single secure environment for the researcher to access it there. Any research outputs are managed and output checked by the lead safe haven, and all of the parties retain oversight just of what's going on with project amendments that might happen, end of project reports, etc. Quite importantly, an oversight group or board has been established, and they then monitor how well the process is working and make adjustments for continuous improvement of the model. So that oversight group is comprised of Caldecott guardians or the involved Caldecott guardians and or their representatives. As I said, not all projects will be suitable for federated governance, and those that aren't will just fall back to the existing process on the left. So still able to get regional data. It'll just be multiple applications as before. But if you can and your application meets the federated governance criteria just now, that model then introduces that feedback or learning loop through the oversight group, which strengthens and builds trust across the health boards. It offers that single route for approvals. It's simpler and more consistent for researchers. And overall, it should reduce the cost of delivering research projects across Scotland. So the federated governance process, as I said, builds on established local approval pathways. So we haven't changed anything about the local approvals pathways. They're still, they're well established and in place. And this is roughly what it looks like for each of the safe havens. There, as I said, that they might be a little bit different in who does it and how and when, but they all pretty much look the same, and they all rely and depend on those links that they have with their research governance support officers, the data controllers, and other relevant independent bodies. Because the federated governance model is founded on that trust between the health boards and their local safe havens, demonstrating equivalence across them was a really important part of the project and what we spent most of the first year on. So that first 12 months involved regional safe havens establishing, as I said, that equivalence. We used frameworks like the SATRA specification to first self-assess and then peer assess. The specification is a standardized architecture for TREs. It's an agreed set of things that a TRE needs to have in place, covering topics like information governance, computing technology and information security, data management, supporting capabilities, etc. Public engagement was also a really important part of the federated governance design process, which Research Data Scotland supported us in through their Scotland Talks data panel. So 2 online sessions were held with members of the public at distinct points in the project for awareness and feedback on the model design. And after that, then followed by the second session was more around ideas and comments on how we communicate that publicly. For instance, we have some communications on the RDS website that you can go and read more about the model there. So we kept the scope for Federated Project intentionally narrow in the first instance, just so we introduced the change slowly and carefully, starting with very low risk projects, so those in green, where the Caldecott Guardians are comfortable making decisions and having them made on behalf of each other. The oversight group then decides over time if and when other types of projects can come in scope once the model's been tried and proven. For instance, studies involving machine learning or AI are initially out of scope because the output checking complexity is much higher than traditional stats analysis projects. And studies involving free text, for instance, are also out of scope initially because the de-identification of such data is more complex than with structured data and therefore higher risk. Just looking at just a little bit about the timeframes. So the design phase ran last year from January to December 2024. It involved regular engagement with the Caldecott Forum, that's those red squares, 3 series or sets of collaboration cafes, that's in Salmon. They were open to the obviously Caldecott Guardians, IG leads, and other health board representatives from across all of the regions. And also the 2 Scotland Talks data public engagement sessions in yellow there. At the end of the 12-month design project, the Caldecott Guardians from the 5 health boards for which regional safe havens hold data agreed in principle to the model through a memorandum of understanding or an MOU, which then allowed this pilot to begin. Research Data Scotland subsequently funded another 12-month project, which we're just at the tail end of now. The Federated Governance Implementation Project in 2025 has really brought that agreed model into practice. It has meant, and the approach we took was to facilitate at least one pass of the end-to-end federated governance process as designed, with 2 or more test case applications, preferably covering 2 or 3 or 4 regional safe havens, so that we could really test all of the pieces of the design and also create that necessary structure and the artifacts and the tools and enabling procedures along the way, and then documenting all of that so that really anyone can pick up on that process and manage it easily in future. So since April, we've been piloting the model. We've been establishing practice within the network through the existing network forums and learning by doing numerous federated data projects. The oversight group has met twice so far and will continue now at quarterly intervals. And we maintain engagement at the Caldecott Forum level in red at the top there. Just updates to them, and anytime they want us to come and talk about what we're doing, go and do that. And we share progress through webinars like this one. So as we had agreed in the MOU, for the first 12 months, which has been this phase 1, the lead safe haven is taking all federated data applications that they receive to each involved safe haven and the oversight group for per project review, so prospective, to build confidence in each other and also the model, and to establish an evidence base for phase 2. So in phase 2, from now going forward, from next year, we'll shift the review to being retrospective reviews by the oversight group as a learning loop and really iterative, policy adjustments and continuous improvement of the model. So just to wrap up, in summary, the benefits of the federated governance model we're finding, and hope that you find also, from a researcher perspective, are that we've streamlined access to that rich granular data, but at a regional data, but at a Scotland-wide scale, with a single application form that will be easy to navigate, and data provided then in a single TRE. You're still able to work with your local safe haven because you have strong working relationships with them already, or are able then to build them through this approvals route. You know that you can, through your local safe haven, then have access to that clinical expertise and the data insights that are really relevant to the local granular data, because it does look different in each region, and that local safe haven expertise is quite crucial in just understanding it and getting the most out of it. From a health board perspective, the health boards have worked with their regional safe havens for many years. They trust the relationships and the processes that they've co-created. Caldecott Guardians also have worked with their peers, for a long time, and therefore they're comfortable with delegating decisions amongst each other. They also, they all have committed to the Scottish Government to support research. So this just allows them to do that, I guess, better. And they do recognize through feedback from researchers and just generally that there are different risk appetites, that there has been a bit of divergence, and so they're able to use that learning loop built into the oversight group to drive that consistency back over time. So our next steps, we're looking to embed that change further by pushing more and more projects through the process, expanding the scope of federated governance to include other types of projects, joining up the governance routes. So this regional safe haven governance model with the national PBAP and research access service pathways, so that any application into the network goes down the appropriate risk-based pathway without you needing to redirect it. We want to make it easier for you to navigate ultimately through simplified access points that make that complexity of risk-based pathways invisible. We want to strengthen the network by expanding the data coverage and just continuously improve the model. So now any questions and discussion? I guess over
Yeah.
to
Thanks,
you.
Susan.
Thanks.
Loads of questions. So popular topic, and people interested in this data set, maybe for their own research. Myself, I have written 10 questions, but you ruled out about half of them because you said AI and machine learning is out scope of this phase, but still have a lot. But, people voted on the questions. I'm going to start with the one most voted. Is that okay? So the one from Michael asks, voted 11 times. How does this federated governance shape the cost structure?
So making research ultimately less, I guess less expensive is through that removing the duplication of effort. We're not having, safe havens and Caldecott Guardians and NHS health boards all independently assessing and reviewing an application multiple times. It means it can be done once in one regional safe haven on behalf of each other. So that's where we see, in the first instance, that saving to the delivery of data for research.
Okay, and so you mentioned it's going to be the aim is going to make it cheaper and easier for people to access better data. Um, but what's the implication is that, starting with, is that more expensive or, you know, times that cost is just not money, sometimes maybe also um, time cost as well, resource, process, that kind of stuff.
Mm, I'm not sure I understood the question specifically. I guess I've talked about the time
Yeah,
savings and therefore, resource costs that can be saved. Is this a question about the then cost of accessing the data to the researcher and how that would be
I
reduced?
guess, yeah, one aspect of that must be related to this cost as well. Yeah.
Um, I'm not sure how to answer that one. I guess by being able to access the data in a federated manner in a single safe haven means there is that cost only once. I mean, there is
Mhm.
a cost attached to maintaining data sets and keeping them safe and secure and provisioning the compute and just the software and the infrastructure. But then doing that in a federated manner means you only pay for it in one safe haven rather than needing to access it potentially through multiple safe havens. So that is a tangible
Yeah.
reduction in
Okay.
cost. I, and please, anybody else on my side who wants to jump in with to elaborate on my responses, please do. I think Stuart, have you taken off your?
Yeah, I'll
Yep,
give a go.
great.
I think essentially it will depend on the demands of the project. So all the safe havens operate on a cost recovery basis. So if the data are there, if it's a simple data request and everyone has the data, there's no extra work on that side. As Susan said, if you're using one TRE, there's just one TRE access cost on that side. But it depends on the complexity of the project and the complexity of the data behind it, really, as well. So there's the infrastructure side, but there's also the kind of data preparation side as well to consider. So we can't give a definite, this is how much it's going to cost, because the process of a regional safe haven is, there's a lot of difference between every single project that comes in terms of the complexity that it has. Thanks.
Great, thanks. There's there's another question which voted 17 yes, about could you clarify what specific aspects of the outputs are considered difficult for AI model to check? And for example, many AI models can be evaluated and reported using the same metrics as logistic regression. So would it be helpful if AI researchers were involved to support this? And have you discussed this with them? That's a very, very sensible question.
Absolutely. So I shall begin and then invite again people closer to the operational space than I to give more detail. I think that what I would say is for federated governance, because we've got now safe havens and health boards making decisions about data access on behalf of each other, we've wanted to approach this just really carefully and slowly, and start with the low risk projects, because we want this change to endure and last. So comparing and demonstrating equivalence and having trust in each other's approvals process was quite straightforward, because they are all based upon the same principles. But how we each risk assess and check AI and machine learning related outputs, there is still, we've got good foundations there, but there's still a little bit of variation across the safe haven. So we just are not quite there yet about equivalence across them. The processes exist, but they're not entirely equivalent yet. And therefore not yet part of the model. It doesn't mean they can't come out. We all know how to do it. We just have kept them out of the initial phase of the federated governance process. I wonder if maybe
I can there, Susan. I was just going to say, I mean, I think the first thing is obviously this is a pilot, so we've done phase one, and I think AI and machine learning can be a consideration for phase two, but we really did need to start off with the simple processes first. And we need to make sure this worked and to get the structure around that. And definitely it can be an idea for further scopes. And at that time, that's when we can engage with those researchers. But for the time being, it was just to keep it as a really tight, quite scope to see, one, have we got the right processes in place? Two, test it to make sure it works. And then we can start building those foundations. But I think, Susan, you were going to bring Pamela in, so I'll let her come in next, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Can reiterate what you said, Jane, but I think it is. We've got a number of projects that we are looking to try and deliver projects across multiple safe havens, and already having those discussions, those early discussions about how do we do this and can we join forces in ensuring that we can share the best expertise, but very keen to be engaging with researchers. I think there's a lot we can learn from those who are actually working and developing the models themselves. It's a lot about sort of explainability and understanding what is, what the models are about. And at the end of the day, it's about sort of risk assessing those. So yeah, really keen to engage with the researchers where possible.
Thanks a lot. I think just follow up on that particular point, and Susan mentioned the output of the AI model may be difficult to check, but in many situations, people might just using machine learning, but the outputs may be exactly the same like traditional methods, just a table figure. Because the reason people doing research, they want to try most powerful models on the data to derive useful knowledge. Of course, given the development of the field, AI, machine learning, deep learning definitely needs to be used. Otherwise, it's so hard to publish, to be honest. Uh, so it'd be good. I think really, really good. I listen and to all of you, get involved, get people from using the technology to be involved in this discussion. It could be very valuable. And what side people expect using these federated safe havens doing their research, get people using AI technologies to talk to you to shape this, that'd be great. That's super good.
Just on that point, if I could just round this out by I hope giving some some hope. So federated governance and this pilot is about the initial approvals process and federating that, streamlining the approvals process. We do have projects in the network that use AI and ML that use federated data. It's just they've used the previous approvals process. They've applied through the separate safe havens, received approval through the separate safe havens, and now are working on the data in a federated manner. So it's not that it's not happening, it's entirely possible. It's just using pre-existing pathways and not the new way of doing it. So we are observing those and do intend on taking the learnings of them to the oversight group in order to create that sense of confidence and comfort that we can do this too in a federated manner, and then in future expanding the scope. But it is a slow and careful step-by-step process.
Understood. Thanks a lot. So next question, voted 9 times from Tom. The question is about how is the lead regional safe haven selected to undertake the application review and approval?
Yep, that's a good question. It's not really a selection process per se. I guess in the first instance, researchers typically have a relationship. They exist. They are in a region. It'll be an academic researcher usually leading a study, and they have a relationship already with their local safe haven, or they work with a university that is connected to the safe haven. So typically that's where you will submit your application, and that safe haven becomes the lead by virtue of receiving the application. And typically they will then remain the lead safe haven. But if there's something in the application or through conversation with the researcher, we find that actually a different safe haven would be better off being the lead, then of course there's capacity, there is that can be changed. The model allows for the role of lead safe haven to shift around if necessary, and if everybody agrees.
Great, thanks. If people don't add anything, the next one from Rosie, voted 8 times. How does that impact the time taken to get the data? For example, is it much longer does it take when multiple safe havens are requested data?
In our experience, I would say no, it doesn't take any longer. We have only pushed 2 federated governance projects through the process so far, but in each occasion, there's been no additional time needed to pull the data together, because during that application process, the safe havens, they're both aware of what's coming. They work together to prepare for the data preparation pending approval, and then the analysts already work well together and to know each other, and we understand each other's processes, and we haven't seen in the examples so far that there's been a huge delay in that. Any delays will just be the same ones that you would find if you were doing multiple applications. Like maybe a safe haven doesn't have or hold the data that's needed already, and they need to go out and get that and acquire it. That might add a little bit of time, but that's not a consequence of this new model. That's just a consequence of the way that data is held and acquired.
Okay, thanks. Next one, voted 6 times from Aman. Can you give example on projects that are not suitable for this federated approach? Because you mentioned some projects are not suitable.
Yeah, so I guess high-risk projects are not suitable just because we made a conscious decision to start with the low-risk ones. And the concept of risk is sometimes a little bit subjective, but we have, defined those as being, certainly at this point in time, anything that involves machine learning for the reasons given, free text, if free text is required, just because the de-identification of that just naturally is a bit more challenging and therefore elevates the risk. If the project involves industry collaboration, so commercial partnerships, that's always a little bit riskier than having just purely academic leads and teams. Any international access to the data is also, higher risk. So partnerships with international researchers is out of scope just now. And any project that is looking for data that's identifiable, that's always possible with the right approvals, but those sorts of project applications really need a lot more scrutiny than this model is able to or willing to provide. So they're also out of scope.
Thanks. Next one, for Christine, also voted 6 times. Has linking in with Age's biorepositories been considered? Researchers are more often than not looking for tissue samples linked with clinical data, and this would further streamline the approval process for researchers. Yes, more about tissue samples, biorepository stuff.
That's a good question. Pamela, I see you've got your speaker off. Is that because you're poised?
Yeah, I'm happy to chat with this.
Please.
There are a number of projects that we support that are linked with the bioresource. It's not been within the scope of this initial pilot, but there's no reason why in the future they couldn't be supported. So yeah, I think it's in the current sort of pilot, no, not covered, but yeah, certainly possible.
Great. Next question from Marat. As data move from regional implementations to larger combined data sets, how do you envisage the technical architecture scaling, for example, from traditional relational database to more distributed computational approaches? A bit more technical question.
That is a technical question that I can't answer right now. I will take that on notice if none of my colleagues are able to comment on that piece.
I guess based on your architecture now.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say it's always a consideration of what's next. It's just not now. But yeah, we definitely can come back with an answer in the future. But it's not something that's within scope of this project, but it is something that is a consideration of how we scale up for the future.
Yeah, thanks. Next one from Nick Mills. First, acknowledge the great initiative that harness all the data. Thank you. The opportunities to scale and reduce the complexity of conducting research using routine health data set. The cost will be the cost. Can the network committee commit to providing this in a timely manner for grant applications through one service? Yes, very practical question.
So for those grant applications, we're talking about just that initial feasibility sort of feasibility of, is it the right data? Can you get the data that you need? Is it enough? And is it within the funding envelope that really you have, that you're applying for? So what we've seen with the projects that have come through so far is, yes, we have been able to, as a network, do that data feasibility check and also the costing exercise in time for the grant applications. They have been quite close to the dates. But in fairness, that can also just be because of the process of getting to the point of being able to apply. I see from where I sit that the regional safe havens, they're really, really, they want to help researchers. And if the initial ask is just outside, maybe the costs that come back will be just too high. Please, researchers, you can work with your regional safe haven to adjust the ask. And that's what I see happening a lot, is that an initial estimate will be provided, well ahead of the grant deadline, but then the ask changes as together in partnership, then you figure out what that sweet spot is, adjusting the data ask, adjusting then the costs associated with that. And that will usually bring then, the deadlines very, very close to each other. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the reality, that I see with getting these sorts of estimates in time for grant applications. They do happen, but it's usually pretty close.
Great, thanks. Next question from Colin, voted 4 times. I also wanted to know this as well, which, let me just find it. Is there a single application point? 5 safe havens currently have a different process differently, I guess. That's a very sensible question.
Yeah. So there is a single application point. That's one of the main changes that we've sought to achieve through this model, which is you only have to apply to one safe haven, but it will be through the application form that currently exists in that safe haven. And yes, currently they are all a little bit different across the 5. That will be one of our next steps. We're already starting to look at, so now that we have the ability for a single application, how do we now standardize the actual application forms across the safe havens? So that's one of our next steps that we want to do. Right now they're different, but you should only need to do one.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Next question from Amir again. Good. I may ask 2 great questions. So by combined data set, you mean all GP data, for example, will be provided as one single file? I mean, one output, I guess?
Yes. So if the data that is being requested is held by the safe havens from which it is being requested, then yes, that data will be provisioned in a single space and a single, file, if you like. Usually they are flat files. Not all regional safe havens have the same data, though. Not all currently have GP data, for instance. Those that have it are able to provide it, but all of them are actively right now seeking to acquire it. So when I put up, the next step slide, I talked about we're looking to strengthen the network, expand, get more data sets. GP data is definitely top of the list for that.
Okay. Yeah, I know. For GP, for example, from Glasgow, it's still not ready for research yet. Yeah, because the ownership is slightly different in different regional safe havens. Yeah, okay. I just skimmed a lot of questions voted the same 3 times, so I started from top down time manner. So from Alexis, so are there any requirements for the lead regional safe haven host of the combined research data set?
Sorry, could you ask that one again?
Yeah, I think any particular requirements for the lead regional safe haven of the combined research data set in terms of who can be the offer all the data set?
I don't know if I've understood the question, but if it is about the lead safe haven's obligations with respect to the data they then might hold on behalf of other health boards, that's a very important and good question.